Good evening, and welcome to this week's episode of Tuesday Night Talks, where I talk about a topic every Tuesday night. Tonight's episode is about unicorns. And what inspired this? Well, when I was younger, I read a book series called Magic Treehouse, and this Merlin mission, 36, entitled Blizzard of the Blue Moon, Jack and Annie encounter a unicorn in New York City. And this episode isn't about the book itself, but rather unicorns. And the part of this book that interests me is an illustration found in the book. If you can see there. This is an illustration of a medieval tapestry. Specifically, the one of the 7 Hunt of the Unicorn tapestries. These were published they were made in the late Gothic period, and they currently hang in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where this book is set. And what interests me is, well, you can see kind of maybe a better image on the front, but what really interests me about this illustration and this tapestry is how different the unicorn is depicted than our modern interpretations, right? So how about a bit of history? The unicorn was first described by the Greek physician Theseus, all the way back in, I believe it was the 9th century, and it was later described by Pliny the Younger and a bunch of other, natural history authors. Natural history being a very fast and loose term. They came through India. And if you read a lot of the older descriptions, it becomes clear that this is not what the authors were trying to describe. If we look at how Marco Polo described the unicorn, or what he called a unicorn, he said that they were scarcely smaller than elephants. They have the hair of a buffalo and feet like an elephant's. They have a single large black horn in the middle of the forehead. They have a head like a wild boar's, and they spend their time by preference wallowing in mud and slime. They were very ugly brutes to look at. They are not at all such as we describe them when we relate that they let themselves be captured by virgins, but clean contrary to our notions. And I'll get to that virgin bit in a bit. But when you read Marco Polo's description, it becomes very clear that the unicorn he is describing is in fact a rhinoceros. Now that might be a more well-known bit of trivia, but I'd like to kind of hone in on what he said about how they are not at all such as we describe them. What he's talking about there is kind of the more classical unicorn. I believe that everyone has a favorite fantastical or mythical creature, and I've always been a big fan of dragons, whether it be dragons, worms, wyverns, drakens, all the sort. But my favorite has to be the classical unicorn. The classical unicorn is it's definitely described as a wild animal. It's often described as being an ass, that is, a donkey with a single horn. It's definitely a wild animal. It has cloven hooves, a goatee. Its horn is sometimes spiraled like that of a narwhal, but sometimes straight and spiraled, but sometimes sharp and curved. And not at all like this bright, brilliant, pure white creature. Oh, actually, you can see the cloven hoofs there. Um, Theseus describes the unicorn's horn, not being like that of a narwhal. It was red and black and white in kind of a striped pattern, but it's again more like a wild animal, something. If you look at the tapestries, not so much this one. This is the unicorn at rest, where the unicorn is trapped in an enclosure, and it's tied to a pomegranate tree. The other contemporary depictions show the unicorn often reared up and with a wild look on its face and a frenzy, right? And one of my favorite bits that kind of cements that it's less of a mythical creature is, well, actually, somewhat as a mythical creature, simultaneously a mythical creature and a real animal, is the way that it's hunted. There's plenty of accounts that the only way to capture or kill a unicorn is you got to get yourself a maiden or a virgin, right? A pure young woman is the only way that you can tame a unicorn, and then you can go and leash it or put a bit and bridle or kill it or whatever you want to do with it. And that's one way to tame a unicorn. The other way to capture a unicorn is what the Shakespearean era scholars they would have like a team of hunters, and one of them would kind of act as a matador. It would stand in front of a tree, goad the unicorn into charging. It would and then at the last moment it would jump out of the way, and then the unicorn would keep charging, and then it would plow itself into the tree, embedding its horn into the trunk, and then you can have at the unicorn. And those two contrasting accounts of how to get a unicorn, I think, are very fascinating. Now, the Shakespearean version of this, the hunting strategy comes from what I think is the coolest part of unicorn lore, is that the unicorn is the mortal enemy of the lion. They're often depicted as being, like, not even they're born to be opponents. They're by essence contrary forces, which is well, of course, one's a predator, one is a prey animal. But it's kind of interesting to think how back when people more so believed in the unicorn as it was a real animal, but also a mythical animal, so too was the lion. Obviously, this is a very Eurocentric, kind of mythology here. But the lion was known to be a real animal, of course. People had been to parts of the world where where lions exist, but they were still kind of held in that more fantastical mindset, right? Think of a male lion. It has a mane. No other wild cat, no other big cat has a mane. That's something very unique to a lion. It's very regal, right? Think of its roar. Think of the way it holds itself. It's very associated with royalty. So too was the unicorn. The unicorn is the national animal of Scotland, and the lion is the animal of England, which is kind of interesting. Now they're one country, but the lion would hunt the unicorn in the same way. They would be engaged in battle, and the lion would be often presented as the smarter one. It would do the same thing that the Shakespearean hunters would do. It would, get the unicorn to charge itself into the tree, and then the lion would be able to go and get the unicorn from the back. And the the lion would most often win in these scenarios. But it's kind of interesting, at least to me, how the unicorn and lion, one is definitely a fantastical creature and one is an entirely real creature, kind of met in the middle in the public eye. One became more fantastical and one was more down to earth. But obviously now we know that unicorns don't exist. Well, rhinoceroses do exist, but unicorns like this don't exist. Our public conscious has shifted. And now that we understand that they're real animals, the unicorn as a symbol has kind of changed. And that's one thing that I think is very personal to me when I say I really like the unicorn. A lot of people would stop and think, oh, something along the lines of My Little Pony, something very sparkly, very colorful, where the the classical unicorn is very different than the modern unicorn. Modern unicorns are very horse-like. They're more colorful, either white or white with rainbow. They are often described as having a gold horn. And they're more often, sparkly and associated with rainbows and these kind of things. A lot of modern myths have leaned into the magic of unicorns. Classically, the unicorn's horn would be a source of medicine. You could ground it up and create tonics that would cure epilepsy and all sorts of ailments. But the modern unicorn uses its horn for magic, not for deadly combat, but for granting wishes or what have you. And I always find the need to clarify what I mean by I like unicorns. But where the classical unicorn was seen as a more real animal, and it's now seen as a definitely more fantastical creature. I think it's very interesting to look at the evolution of the unicorn as a symbol, right? As I'm not going to say people in the medieval or classical periods believed in magic. Because I can't know that, for one, but that's kind of a bit demeaning to say that they believed all sorts of things we would deem silly. No, I'd rather say that this sort of creature was presented as a lot more real, and real creatures were presented as a bit more surreal. And whereas now we have a very clear-cut divide between animals and mythical beasts. The unicorn, as it was, originally described, was in books of natural history. These were, catalogs of all sorts of animals from around the world, some real, some less so, whereas the modern unicorn is, more famously adapted in things like My Little Pony. And another way that the unicorn has evolved is it's kind of taken on qualities not traditionally associated with it. Of course, it had the healing powers, but you may have heard of alicorns. Alicorns are a Pegasus with a unicorn's horn, or a unicorn with a Pegasus's wings. Pegasus being a winged horse from Greek mythology. The classical unicorn, as I said earlier, could only be tamed by a maiden or by a virgin. In the presence of one, it would, become immediately docile and lay its head down, often fall asleep. That representation of it being pure led to the common depiction of it being pure white. A very stark, impossible white. often kind of akin to a Andalusian horse, that very, very bright white. And leaning, it at the same time lost the idea of purity, but also gained it. No modern interpretations, of a unicorn require it to, have met a virgin in order to be tame, or even in consider such a thing. Consider its a wild nature. Another sort of evolved meaning is the phrase something being described as a unicorn, similar to how something is being described as a real white whale. That's something that's very rare, something very hard to acquire or achieve, something, a real sight to behold, a once in a lifetime event, once in a blue moon, these sorts of things. Something being described as a unicorn is something completely unheard of, something very profound to witness. That's an adaptation of how, again, it would only appear to very few, most often, again, young women, pure young women, virgins. This was often adapted as a religious symbol, specifically by Christianity. The unicorn often took on the qualities of the Virgin Mary, someone who is inherently pure, someone who is, symbolizes the triumph over good, good over evil, purity over impurity. I mean, heck, not my favorite translation, but the King James translation of the Bible, in Numbers 23:22, says that God brought Israel out of Egypt with the strength of a unicorn. Now, a lot of modern scholars would refute that translation, instead translating it as a wild ox, which, kind of loses the fantasy of it. But ultimately, a unicorn is a fantastical creature, and it has become a fantastical creature. It was once something that could feasibly exist, but now it's become something beyond belief, really. And it really makes me wonder, what else in life becomes more fantastical as time passes. The poem, there's a poem attached to the tapestry in the Magic Treehouse novel. One of the verses reads, then a young girl must love him and show him the way, lest he be trapped forever on public display. If he loses his chance to rise and depart, all magic will fade from his horn and his heart. These last four lines suppose that over time, well, obviously, for the sake of the plot in this book, the unicorn must be freed by a certain time. But this poem supposes that over time, the magic will fade, whereas what we have seen throughout history is that, at least with the unicorn, the magic has not in fact faded, and it has in fact grown. I wonder which is true. Maybe both can be true simultaneously. Do we grow the magic of the world as time goes past, or does the world lose its magic? Maybe that's something to think about. How about a spoiler for next week? Next week we will talk about wonder. and how we lose wonder in the world. Maybe that's an answer to the question of the unicorn. Maybe the unicorn does lose its magic over time. At least that's what I'll suppose next week. Thank you. I've been Elberry Boy, and this has been Tuesday Night Talks. Good night.